Would you like to read about witches and maybe learn some magic on the way? Of course you would. Here are some of my favorite books about witches and witchcraft, from cozy stories to quite creepy tales, and some non-fiction books in there if you're interested in the history and in the magic of witches themselves. Hello, I'm Sinead. This is my spooky corner of YouTube, where I share my love for spooky books, spooky films, spooky things in general, as well as updates on whatever I'm reading and dip into what you are reading too. And if I happen to enchant a raven on the way, well, what's the harm? Actually, once there was quite a few repercussions. Today I'm going to bring you some of my favourite books that I have read that involve witches or forms of witchcraft. Most of these are novels, but I do have some non-fiction recommendations as well. Really, the subject is so huge and there are so many books out there. You do a quick Google search and for witchy books and it's just boom! Okay, well there were 5 million last year apparently. But I've put together a list of some of my favourites that I've read over the years. Some you will recognise, and maybe there will be a few that you haven't thought of, hopefully that you can add to your TBR. But before I share my book recs with you, I have something to share from this video's sponsor, Bellesa. Who are Bellesa? They make very good things. You guys know I read a lot of gothic fiction. I do read a lot of stories involving witchcraft, a female rage, of good for her energy. There are plenty of books out there inspired by the too many cases throughout history where women's sexuality, female desire, the big O itself, was turned into something monstrous and sinister, which is why female repression shows up in a lot of horror books, because repressing a woman's sexual desires is monstrous. So we must learn from our books to make sure that history does not repeat itself in that respect. This is why this video is sponsored by my friends at Bellesa, a by-women company that is completely focused on all things sexual wellness. Their mission is to empower everyone to embrace, explore, and celebrate sexuality. And even better, Bellesa has created a special giveaway for me, for you guys. They are literally sending out a free vibrator or a free gift card to anyone who signs up to the giveaway that is linked in this video's description. Bellesa has an incredible range of products. They are diverse, they are discreet, they are sophisticated, and they are there to meet whatever needs you have. The pebble, this is literally pleasure in the palm of your hand. Air Vibe, going to take care of all the spots on your list. Also, this, like many of the other products, is waterproof. The Rose, for your rose. Thump. Yes, it's got a pretty punchy name and it packs a punch, this one. Seriously, there are things that I didn't know until this came into my life. You can check out all the information about Bellesa, enter the giveaway, find out about these products via the link in my video description. Sexual expression and exploration is a wonderful thing to do at any stage of your life. I hope you have fun exploring with Bellesa. On to the book recommendations. While I have read a fair few books about witches over the years, I still feel like I've only scratched the surface in terms of novels, because there are so many great writers and great books that are coming out every single year with witches at their heart. Whether those authors are tackling the historical or the history of witchcraft and the witch trials, they are delving into history, or whether you have a new generation of witches. You have witches for the 21st century, you have modern witches for young people, for older people, and most of these stories involve females, not all of them, but embracing that magic and the power that women had that was so oppressed for centuries. Today I have a collection of fictional novels and also some non-fiction that may interest you if you're interested in the folklore, the history, the ins and outs of what it is to be a witch and what it was to be a witch long ago. Wasn't necessarily a very nice thing. The novels, I've got some cozy and I've got some more challenging and frightening ones, all of which I have enjoyed. There's also a few books that are on my TBR that I'll mention, and I'd also love to know which books you would recommend. If you like what you see, please do subscribe to my channel, like this video, save it, leave a comment of more book suggestions or things that you would like to hear from me from the future. I'm going to start with some cozy witchy recommendations for those who just want to dip their toe into a little light witchcraft with a happier, snugglier setting. There will be some mild peril in these books, but we're much more in the territory of, you know what would be great? Let's get a cottage in the woods and we'll get a cat and we'll get a crow and we'll just boil things over the stove and people will come to us for healing salves and sometimes we'll dance under the moonlight. And there will be baking. This book just sneaks into the cozy section of my witchy books, even though it's sort of on the cusp. It is the wonderful Cackle by Rachel Harrison. Rachel Harrison is one of my favorite novelists, one of my favorite horror writers. Her books are funny, they are quite rock and roll, they are dark. Many of them deal with quite harsh subject matter and have some pretty scary moments in it. Cackle is the snuggliest, I would say, of all of her books, but not without its moments. It's described as witchy Gilmore Girls. This is the story of Annie, who is 30 years old and has just been dumped by her boyfriend. They'd been in a relationship for a long time, it really wasn't working out, but she's been left feeling pretty brokenhearted and despondent about her life. But then she accepts a new job in a village outside of New York City, a very quaint, very pretty, very charming, very, oh my God, why can't we all live here kind of place. I pictured this village perpetually in autumn. The leaves were always crisp, the air was always fresh, there was pumpkin spice everything. While at the village, Annie meets Sophie, an incredibly beautiful, beguiling, mysterious woman who strikes Annie immediately with her confidence and with her friendliness. Sophie welcomes Annie into her life and is immediately trying to encourage her new friend to stop apologizing, to stop running herself down, to embrace her inner power and to be the best she can possibly be. Annie may be a little concerned that the rest of the people in the village seem a little afraid of Sophie, and Sophie's incredible mansion does have its share of strange noises and spooky dark corners. But what's the worst that could happen? Cackle really is the equivalent of a massive mug of hot chocolate. It is a really good story about friendship. It is a good, simple story about women reclaiming their power. Annie, our protagonist, is pretty relatable in that she is really trying to get on with her life, but she has just been struck down by so many knocks and blows and little comments from people in her life that you end up feeling, you can feel her frustration with feeling like, am I really doing any of this right? And when she meets Sophie, a woman who seems to have incredible powers and incredible sway over the world, that she feels inspired. It's a really good story about how you reclaim your shine, how women should elevate other women, and where you get your power from in a very cute supernatural setting in a very cute village. There are spiders in this, but the spiders, adorable. A book that is more fantasy fiction but is just got so many cozy feels to it is The House Witch. This is a book that I dip into every now and then. Even though I've read through the story, I just go back and just sort of like dip into sections of it. Now in this story, our witch is a male, Finley. Finley is a house witch that joins the king's castle. He is employed to come and be the new cook. Royal household is dealing with all sorts of political upheaval and internal struggles. There's a really rich cast of characters, but you've got this backdrop of Finlay coming in as the house witch. No one knows at first that he's a witch, and is taking over the kitchen in just the most adorable kind of having all of these magical helpers and his little black cat who is so cute, so cute, so cute. It's so sweet and cozy and a good fantasy story, a good love story at the heart of it. It is part of a series. It's got a humorous element to it. It's meant to be funny. There's meant to be little spats and battles between the characters who sort of love each other, really. I will say that it is quite a thick book and it's got a lot going on in it and you can sort of get lost in it. It did remind me a little bit of a Terry Pratchett book, not the same level as Terry Pratchett, but the same way that I feel about his books. I so enjoy Terry Pratchett's books, but sometimes I actually get lost in the story and I don't necessarily finish them, even though I've really enjoyed what I'm reading. That's a bit of a strange description, but some people may be with me on that. Enjoy The House Witch for what it is. It is cozy fantasy with witchcraft, with snuggly little scenes in it. I think it's really cute. A very twee book that I have been listening to, and again, I dip into every now and then. I've not actually finished it yet, but I feel like including it, is The Very Secret Society for Irregular Witches. This is a charming story about found family, about a young woman who is hiding the fact that she is a witch in modern society, but then she gets an invitation to go to Nowhere House, where she is being asked to teach 3 young witches the ways of the witchy world. It is her being thrown into this situation with these youngsters, with this cast of characters in Nowhere House. Yes, there's a love interest in there. It is giving very House of the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune with witches in a different setting. Very cute. Some people describe it as twee, and I don't think twee is necessarily a bad thing if that's what you're looking for. Cozy, nice representation through the book, and just a lovely story about found family. As I said, I have not completed that book yet. It's so popular and it has been so enjoyable to listen to. So I will put it out there. If you have completed it and you would rave about more from this author, please let me know. I will also give a throwback to a book that has been turned into a very popular film, but I really enjoyed this when it came out. It is Chocolat by Joanne Harris. Chocolat, if you don't know, is the story of a young woman who arrives with her daughter. She is unwed, to open a chocolate shop in this quaint, beautiful French village. But this village is about to celebrate Lent. A woman doing business and unwed, and she's opening a chocolate shop at Lent when you're all supposed to not have. Oh, this won't do. Chocolat is a charming book in many respects, very indulgent. Joanne Harris has a wonderful command of the language in terms of describing the chocolate shop, the beauty, the opulence, the colors that she uses, set against this sort of backdrop of oppression of this village that is very straight-laced. You've got a lot of church versus paganism in this story. This idea that is via a witch, or is she channeling the powers of her ancestors, of her relatives? And there is a love story mixed in there. It does have some hard-hitting subject matter in there. You have a lot of misogyny in here. You also have some instances of domestic abuse. But it is one to gently check your trigger warnings. I remember very much enjoying reading it when it came out. Don't know how it stands up repeat reading or reading in the modern day now. People can let me know. But also was famously turned into a film with Juliette Binoche and also Johnny Depp in it. Not a bad adaptation at all. Very cozy, delightful. The follow-up book to Chocolat, The Lollipop Shoes, has even more witchcraft in it. You have an antagonist in that book who channels a different kind of witchcraft, and it's very interesting witchcraft from different cultures. Very vividly described. I so enjoyed The Lollipop Shoes, really liked it. Again, not often mentioned in a books about witchcraft, but a very nice play on that. Those are the really cozy books. Now let's bridge the gap and get on to some possibly quite scary and creepy stuff. A good book to bridge the gap is going to be Circe. How could we not talk about witches without talking about Circe? The witch, the famous witch of Greek mythology. Everybody, I think, had a copy of On a Beach at one point when it was first published. And rightly so, because Circe is such a joy to read. This is the full story of Circe from Madeline Miller's perspective. The story of her as a child, of the powers that she had, her position in terms of the realm of the gods, of where she came from, how her powers emerged, her banishment to her island, how she starts to use her skills and use her gifts, and her role in various famous stories throughout mythology, and her interactions with different figures from the mythology. One of the reasons I think Circe was so popular, it is very well written and it is very vivid and very rich in its language, and equal care is given to Circe's everyday life on the island, of her being alone but also learning to use her skills, to use her crafts. It's sort of half the time you have this really quite idyllic image of a woman just living her best life in a beautiful surrounding, and when she is in her power, when she is confident, how she looks after herself, she looks after the land. The challenges that she meets, and they are harsh at points, when men find a woman alone or want to challenge her and rock up on her doorstep, and people, you know, obviously in Greek mythology you have an island, people are going to be crashing into it constantly and coming and knocking at the door going, ooh, a woman alone. And those challenges, and some of those are very hard hitting, how she deals with intruders who come to try and take her land, take what is hers, take her and have control over her when she has fought so long to be a woman in her own right. That's what's really appealing about the story. While there were and are other great writers who were retelling the tales of Greek mythology, of the women in Greek mythology, they have been for a very long time, I do feel like Circe hit such a moment. That's why we're seeing a lot of new books about different women of Greek mythology. Maybe that's the marketing is really pushing it. There's no disrespect to those authors. Circe certainly sparked a new interest in learning about the women from Greek mythology, rather than just getting, oh, what did Perseus do? What did Zeus do? They fucked shit up is what they did. Moving from Greek mythology back to the witchy ways. If you enjoy fantasy books rather than desperately scary witchy books, then I can recommend a couple of books by A.J. Slatter. You have The Path of Thorns, and you also have the Briar Book of the Dead. This is part of the Sourdough series by A.G. Slatter. Started off with All the Murmuring Bones, which unfortunately I have not read yet, but then you had The Path of Thorns and you had the Briar Book of the Dead, and the latest book is The Crimson Road. These are all standalone books that deal with a magical universe, a fantasy setting, but they are incredibly detailed, multi-layered stories that borrow a huge amount from folklore. The Path of Thorns is a more gothic tale about a young woman who turns up on the doorstep of a grand estate wanting to work for the family there. But this is a woman in disguise, in magical disguise, and she can wield certain powers that have been passed on to her through generations. She has things that she wants to find out about this family. There's also werewolves outside, so you're already getting a hint of just how much is going on in this book. The Briar Book of the Dead is all about the Briar family, the Briar sisters, who are a multi-generational family of witches, overseeing their town, making sure that everyone is looked after, commanding the area as the powerful family. But then a couple of dead bodies show up, and there seems that there could be dark forces at work, and it's up to Ellie Briar, the first of the family who has been born in a very long time without powers. It is up to her to try and find out what is happening and to solve the various mysteries outside the family walls and inside them. A.J. Slatcher is a very interesting writer, incredibly popular, and her books are so detailed and so embedded with so many elements of folklore, lots of different things going on. You really do need to go into her books thinking of it as fantasy, but they're not the thick, huge tomes of world building. She is very rapid in her descriptions, gets to the point and packs a huge amount of plot into these multi-layered stories. I will admit that after reading Path of Thorns and Briar Book of the Dead, I really enjoyed them, and the stories stayed with me for a long time. While reading them, I almost wanted more world building, if anything, but then these books really work if you don't want that heavy, huge sort of fantasy tome. Nothing wrong with those at all, but if you're not in the mood for it, you want some good fantasy with lots of folklore and lots of witches in it, these books would absolutely tick the box. As I said, I've not read all the Murmuring Bones yet, but I do have The Crimson Road, which is the 4th book in her series, and that does bring in all the different characters with some vampires. That's on my list. That is high on my list. I need to read that. This is your friendly reminder to please hit subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, so I can keep bringing you videos and more recommendations of where the witches meet. What is it, boy? Say hello to the nice people. You just want to cuddle, don't you? Or just climb. Ow! I've said books about witches. There will be one that I'm sure plenty of people have been scrolling through going, is she going to mention? Yes, I'm going to mention Slewfoot by Brom, a book that lands on so many lists of great witchy books. Do I think it deserves a place on there? Yes. Even though I had a couple of notes while reading the book, I couldn't not include it because it really does work. Slewfoot is set in Puritan era New England, where you have a young woman, Abatha. She is recently widowed, and she is desperately trying to retain control of her farmland and her estate. But this being Puritan New England, a woman alone who is forthright in her views and doesn't really like to take any shit from men in the village, she ain't gonna do well. Her former brother-in-law is pretty determined to get his hands on Abatha's land and make some pretty disgusting comments about her as well. And of course the menfolk of the village are only too happy to back him. Abatha is having to walk this tightrope of seemingly being pious and compliant when she is filled with rage, with outrage and grief and all manner of feelings that you might expect a woman to feel in that situation. But at the same time, there are rumblings in the forest and in the land around the village and around Abatha's land. Slewfoot appears to have woken up. An ancient entity that is tied to the land and is being advised by other spirits of the forest. Slewfoot is observing what has happened to his land and is getting pulled and pushed in weird directions by the different spirits, compelling him to take his revenge on the people who have taken the land from him. Will he mark the end times for the likes of Abatha, or will he actually be a savior? This dual storyline which does meld together, as you might expect, of Abatha and Slewfoot, both figures in their world that are trying to make sense of what is happening around them, trying to assert their power, trying to assert their control, and they are being pushed and pulled by outside forces, and you don't know whether those forces have their best interests at heart, whether they are being puppeted, and it's a really nice juxtaposition, those two storylines as they go ahead, because what is Slewfoot really fighting for? Is Slewfoot, as this sort of devil-like creature, capable of manipulation? Is Abatha making the right decisions, and does she have power that it would be best for her to start embracing and to realize? This story can get a little convoluted in its middle. I certainly felt that but it does build to an incredible climax. Without giving too much away, things don't look good for Abatha, and there are some upsetting scenes. You may want to trigger warnings about animal death, I'm sorry to say, but it does build to an incredibly satisfying conclusion and climax. Every bit of doubt that I had about the story and that I maintain, I think it does get convoluted in parts, it really, really pays off with the very, very satisfying conclusion that goes absolutely all in. This book is, of course, also beautifully illustrated by Brom. If you get the hard copy, it's sitting behind me here. It's got these incredible pictures through it. I still have issues with the fish baby child thing. It is a very popular book that does look at that piece of history while mixing a lot of folklore and fantasy elements with it. But of that period of history of colonial New England, of how easy it was to label a woman a witch, label a person a witch. There are men and women throughout the book who are treated horrifically by those who just seek to control them, who sit for their own personal gain. Slewfoot, A Tale of Bewitchery, a good slice of what is ultimately a good for her story. A recent read for me, one that combines horror and fantasy, is Alexis Henderson's The Year of the Witching. This is another book that absolutely channels the history of puritanical society and witchcraft and witch trials and just transports it into a fantastical setting. So it's not a piece of historical fiction. It takes such inspiration from there, but it gives it that horror fantasy twist. Emmanuel lives in the community of Bethel. Bethel is overseen by a prophet, this religious figure who commands over the people in the community while also taking his choice of brides, but also is a very big sort of religious church-going man, and it's gross. But everyone is pious, everyone complies, because of the past stories that they have heard or in the legends that surround Bethel, that the woodland around Bethel is haunted by the witches of old, the witches that were driven out of the village and were cursed to keep away, but maybe they will rise up again and everyone fears them. Emmanuel is trying to live a good, normal life, even though she has been partially shunned by society because of the sins of her mother and her father. Her mother, who had a relationship with a man of a different race, he was burned at the stake and she was condemned and cast out of the village. But wouldn't you know it, one day Emmanuel stumbles into the woods and she has an encounter with the witches, and that will spark a series of cataclysmic events that will change the future of Bethel and will put Emmanuel's life in jeopardy, meaning she has to team up with an unlikely figure, and some romance may emerge while trying to save her community, her family, and the world. The Year of the Witching has a slightly slow start. You feel like you're in this very dour, miserable community of Bethel where everyone is trying to comply and it's dark and women are being very much oppressed but being treated like no, it's not oppression, this is good for you. But then it rapidly spirals into this fantastical horror story that is very thrilling. It is very high octane in parts. There are multiple layers, that old classic of the church versus the pagan. And the thing that I really like about The Year of the Witching, not only Emmanuel's story, I think she's a really compelling character, is the witches themselves are dark. These witches that haunt the woods are angry, they are primordial, they deal in dirt and blood and darkness and sacrifice, while Emmanuel and her powers as a potential witch is a savior in the story. You do have witches who are dark and they are antagonists, they are destructive, and they are destructive because the world has not treated them well. It has given them every reason to be vengeful, to rain anger and fire and pain down upon the world. And it's nicely played out in the story because you can understand it. You can understand it, even though it is a force that needs to be stopped, but stopped in a different way than trying to suppress, oppress. It is a power that needs to be understood. My last recommendation on this list, certainly, and there's always room for part two, is one to hold on to your hearts for and to brace yourself. It's a slightly different one. It's Burial Rites by Hannah Kent. One of the most beautiful, bleak books I have ever read. This is a story that has elements of witchcraft in it, but it is such a powerful story about prejudice, about human feeling, about the way that we treat each other, the way we perceive each other. It is so powerful. It's inspired by the true story of a woman who was accused of murder in Iceland in the 1800s. You have Agnes in the story, who has been accused of killing her lover. She has certainly been labelled as a witch, given what has transpired, and she is awaiting her execution. She has been condemned to die. She's having to stay at the home of a farmer and his wife, the wife who was horrified to have her there after she has been in a jail. She's been terribly mistreated, and she's waiting out her days for this execution. You also have a man who's offering to be her spiritual guidance, and is seeking to understand her story, the reasons behind her being accused of murder, why this man has ended up dead. And her silence sort of compels people to go, what is actually really happening here? Why aren't you defending yourself? Why aren't you telling the story? It is so beautifully written, this book. The stark, bleak landscape of Iceland in the 1800s, the conditions in which they live, is so well realized by Hannah Kent. Hannah Kent has this power as a writer to just perfectly conjure up these historical settings, the landscape, the language around it. It just is absolutely realized in your head. You feel the cold and the dirt and the dark so well in this book. I certainly did. And Agnes's story is so sad and tragic as it plays out, as the people around her try to understand what would drive a woman. And it is playing into this idea of a woman who has committed murder. She must be a witch. She must have used her powers, whether those are actual powers or just that a woman is inherently evil. It is such a good story. I urge people to read it. It is sad. Hold on to yourself when you read it. A beautifully done book. Burial Rites. 3 books that are on my TBR. I'm sure people will be shouting these at the screen. One of them is Weyward. A lot of people have recommended Weyward to me. I don't know why I haven't gotten around to reading it. You have 3 different women connected by 3 different timelines. One is in the modern day, one is in the 1600s, I believe, and the other is during the Second World War. Each of the women are being challenged, whether they're being held back, whether they are under suspicion for being too forthright, too outspoken, whether they're trying to uncover secrets. It is a book that so many people praise as one of the great witch books of the modern age. Have you read Weyward? What do you think about it? Is it worth putting on my list? Another book is Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow. It's the story of 3 sisters living in the 1890s in Salem. At this point, everyone knows witches don't exist, but they have become involved in the suffrage movement at the time, and they start to explore the history or the elements of witchcraft, start to discover ways in which they could actually use this power to their advantage. I love the sound of this story because you've got the suffrage movement and the fight for the women to vote next to this persecution of the witches, and how is that going to be managed in that sort of time setting. I did dip into Starling House by this author. It wasn't for me, but it doesn't mean that this book won't be. Has anyone read this? Would you recommend? The third book that just is screaming my cup of tea, The Witch of Willow Hall. This is described as gothic, dark witchcraft tale. Immediately it's got a hall in the title. You just know someone's going to be running around that in a long dress. Another one set in the 1800s, set in Massachusetts, again harking back to Salem and the witch trials there, taking inspiration from it, it seems. 3 sisters run away to Willow Hall, the family estate. I don't know what this book is about, but as I said, the cover of it, everything is giving me vibes. Please tell me if anyone's read this, and should I? Those are the fiction books that I have read, and some that are on my TBR. But I want to end with sharing some non-fiction books that, if you're interested in witchcraft, in the history of witches, you might want to dive into. The history of the witch trials in particular is a fascinating subject. That is something that I have dabbled in, have dipped into. I really feel like, I've only ever scratched the surface of it because there's so much to explore. The insanity of James I, who was just, witches are everywhere. We must stamp them out and we must burn them. And people going, great, okay, good. So we can make the women do what we want now. Yay. The persecution of witches should always be in inverted commas. I should acknowledge that, because they weren't witches. Whether or not you believe in witchcraft, whether you are a practicing witch, the witch trials, I cannot overstate this. They weren't witches. They weren't flying around on broomsticks. They weren't doing the things that they were accused of. Because of my work on the Poisoner's Cabinet as well, I can share a lot of weird stories about witchcraft, tools of witches. over the years as well. You know, the flying ointments on the brooms as well, and the different potions that were allegedly used with poisons and all sorts of things in it. It's all that shit, but it's fun. I could rant about this for a while, but here are some stories. A book I would recommend, Witchcraft by Marion Gibson. This is the history in 13 trials. Marion Gibson takes 13 trials, witch trials, from history and goes into great depths in this book. She seeks to redress the balance where so many stories and so many articles, so many books for so many years focused on the men, focused on James I, and it focused on Matthew Hopkins, and it focused on the books that the men had put out about witch trials. But this now looks at the women. It looks at the trials of what happened in each of their stories. This book not only covers historic cases, but it applies it to the modern day, to different eras. It's very well done, very well thought out, really one to get on your list. If you really want to delve into the witch and paganism and the history of it, one great source is Ronald Hutton. Ronald Hutton, he has many, many videos on YouTube as well. There are many videos you can watch of him speaking, of lectures he's given. A really thoughtful, very interesting person writing about the history of paganism, where it comes from, challenges certain ideas, but is generally very sensitive with it and very well thought out. This is a lot of information, of interesting history about the witch. But if you want to dive into it and want to get that kind of level of detail, Ronald Hutton is a very good source. A truly beautiful book by a really lovely publisher. I have worked with this publisher in the past, but I would recommend this book anyway. It is Witches. This book is by Batford. They are the same people who do the Treasury of Folklore books that are so beautifully done. But this is folklore, history, and superstition, all about witches. It is a gorgeous book that is illustrated at parts as well. You have these really cool drawings. There you go, some of the trials there. It will talk about the folklore around how you find a witch, what were the methods that were used, but as well as the old lore and legends and the history, diving into elements of it in a really rich and really beautifully laid out book. Willow Winchon wrote this book. They are a historian of witchcraft. They've dedicated it to witches past, present, and future. It is a really lovely book, and, you know, come on, just have that on your shelf. Another beauty of a book, a beast, one to have on your coffee table and to make sure that everyone reads it when they come round for coffee, is A History of Magic, Witchcraft, and the Occult. This is a huge, big sort of encyclopedia-style delve into the history of witches, a history of magic. And it's got a foreword by Susanna Lipscomb, who is a brilliant historian, really, really fantastic. Again, look how gorgeous. Look how beautiful it is. You're going through some of the really ancient runes. You've got from early civilization and the cultures around the world of where magic came from and how it is wielded. And then you have, oh look, Gothic magic. You see, that's up our street. We love that. I haven't opened this book in a little while, and every time I do, I just go, it's me. Charms. It goes into the fairy tales here as well, the Fairy Tale Witch. Here you are. An absolutely brilliant tome. If you want to learn about magic, if you want to learn about the different types of magic that is used around the world, that has been used around the world, and where witches and the occult fit into the history, this little dive into it, it's such a good book. It's a good starter book. You will really enjoy just dipping into it and getting bits of that information. And she's pretty. There you go. That is my rundown of a few of the books involving witches and witchcraft that I have really enjoyed, as well as some that are on my list, and some tomes for you to dive into if you want to learn more about the witch, about magic, if you want to start wielding it. I'm particularly interested in any recommendations you have of books that handle the history of witchcraft and the witch trials well in novel form. But I'm also always in the mood for like really good fantasy, cozy, witchy, let's all live in a cottage in the woods kind of vibe and do spells. Thank you to Bellesa for sponsoring this video, and please, all of you, go and embrace your witchy side wherever and however you see fit. Stay spooky, bye-bye.